really briefly, my background, my undergraduate education is in electrical engineering, is my major. My minor was in political science. I got my law degree here in Portland at Lewis and Clark. While at law school, I interned for the State Department of Justice for the Corrections Litigation Unit, which is mainly doing federal habeas corpus litigation on behalf of the state. When I graduated law school, I went to work for a private firm in town, doing mostly patent and intellectual property prosecution and litigation. I moved to the district attorney's office, where I was a deputy district attorney for a couple of years until I eventually ended up at the police bureau. I spent my first 5 years as a patrol officer at East Precinct predominantly before transferring to the training division just a couple months ago. This position is new in the bureau. Previously, we've had deputy district attorneys and the city attorney's office through Dave Warborough teaching law to the advanced academy, to in-service, to the current officers, to detectives management, and now that's going to be my role. So tonight, basically what I've been asked to do is not only go over the laws that relate to person encounter, search and seizure, and a little bit about Miranda, but kind of how we're teaching our officers to apply these concepts on the street. I tend to talk really fast, and the only point in me being here tonight is to answer any questions you have. So if you have questions, please interrupt me. If not, my goal is kind of to get through this as quickly as possible, relate the information to you, and let you guys go home. So really quick, person encounters is the term we use to describe all types of encounters between officers and citizens on the street. First, we refer to mere conversation. This is probably the area that's had the most litigation recently. Mere conversation is the term we give to when an officer is approaching a citizen on the street and really just wants to have the same encounter that I would have with you in uniform that I would have with you out of uniform. And ironically enough, that is how the court has judged this. So the standard will be, in legalese, a law enforcement officer intentionally and significantly restricts, interferes with, or otherwise deprives an individual of their individual liberty or freedom of movement, or an individual reasonably believes that the officer has done that. At the point the officer has restricted your freedom, you're no longer in mere conversation. Now, at that point, the court's going to require that you have reasonable suspicion of a crime or probable cause of a violation before an officer can restrict your freedom in that fashion. So to stay in mere conversation, the officer is trying to avoid making somebody feel like they have restricted their freedom of movement or their liberty. Recent opinions, I think, have described this in terms that are much easier to understand. So an officer can stay in mere conversation if asking questions that a normal citizen wouldn't ask if they conduct themselves in a manner that would be non-offensive to a citizen if done by another citizen. So what the court is basically trying to say is I can come up in uniform, working as a police officer, to a citizen and say, ma'am, do you mind talking to me for a couple minutes? Because I could do that out of uniform and it would be non-offensive to most reasonable citizens, I can do that in uniform as a police officer. What the court's saying is once you pass the point where a normal citizen would consider that offensive, then you're using your authority as a police officer and you're no longer in mere conversation. So where it would be socially acceptable to approach you and say, ma'am, can I have a couple minutes of your time? It probably wouldn't be socially acceptable for me to step into your path and block your path to get you to talk to me, or grab your arm to turn you around to talk to me. At that point, the court's going to say, no, you've exercised authority, I've restricted your freedom in a significant way, and in order to do those type of things, I need reasonable suspicion of a crime or probable cause of a violation. The second way they described it, an officer can stay in mere conversation if the officer avoids an unconstitutional show of authority or restraint of the citizen's liberty. This is the kind of thing that comes up if I want to engage you, sir, in mere conversation. I don't have any suspicion you've committed a crime or committed a violation, but I want to talk to you. I'm not going to be able to pull my patrol car up with my lights on, because the lights are a show of authority that would make a reasonable citizen think, I'm not free to go about my business, this officer is making me stay here. So when an officer does these kind of things, he's going to avoid a show of authority. He's going to avoid directives. He's going to avoid offensive tone. And definitely, as far as a show of authority, I'm not going to park my car in your path. So if I want to contact somebody driving down the street, I'm going to pull my car around the corner, make sure my car is not blocking your path, get out of my car, approach you on foot, how I would do to you if I wanted to talk to you and I was not working. If I was completely out of uniform and wanted to start a conversation with you, I wouldn't pour my car up in front of you, I wouldn't use a light system, I would just get out and approach you on foot. The third way, an officer can stay in mere conversation if they do not allow the citizen to reasonably believe they are the subject of a criminal investigation. So even if an officer does everything right, I park my car around the corner, I don't use lights, I don't use directives, I approach you and I say, ma'am, can I have a couple minutes of your time? And you tell me yes. What I'm wondering is, do you have drugs on you? Can I search you for drugs? Can I have your name and date of birth? Because I'd like to run you for warrants. What the court is saying, when you start making those kind of inquiries, the reasonable, so I take her name and date of birth and I get on the radio and I say, dispatch, I'd like to check her for wants and warrants. What the court is acknowledging is that even though I may think we're on equal footing because I'm just a guy wearing a blue shirt, the normal citizens, I'm an armed, uniformed police officer, and when I start making those kinds of inquiries, she may not feel free to leave, and that belief might be reasonable under the circumstances. So without some kind of authority, without some kind of reasonable suspicion or probable cause, the officer is going to be beyond reasonable suspicion at that point, and that encounter, that person encounter, is going to be unlawful.
What kind of questions can an officer, or when the Bureau is training its officers, what kind of questions would you instruct officers that might be butting up against that stop rather than mere conversation, just verbal questions?
So, you know, it's less specifically what the question asked is and more the encounter between that citizen and the officer, and that'll make more sense in a second. So if I just came up to you and asked the type of questions I just asked, can I search you for drugs? Do you have drugs or weapons on you? Can I run you for warrants? What the court's saying is that indirect coercion, because I'm in uniform, because I'm saying, do you have, you know, I'm basically accusing you of committing a crime, or at least inquiring whether you have, correct? So what the court has said, and actually this is my next slide, so what the courts have said is the officer can counteract that indirect coercion by verbalizing. So I can ask those questions, but what I have to do is come to you, ma'am, can I have a couple minutes of your time? You know, sure. You know, this is a high drug area, or we've been having lots of car prowls, or, you know, I'd like to run you for warrants and see if you have any drugs in your purse. What I want you to understand is you're completely free to go. You're not under arrest. You're not in trouble. My boss just wants me out here talking to people and seeing who's out here. That kind of conversation will keep you in mere conversation. That's not a stop at that point. Because I'm verbalizing basically that indirect coercion, because I'm a police officer and I'm a figure of authority and you're a citizen, I'm contradicting by telling you specifically, you're free to go. I'm not stopping you, you're not in trouble. I would just like to search your purse for drugs, is that okay? And what the court's saying in those situations is, when you verbalized, you've contradicted what that kind of indirect or, you know, coercive environment is between an authority figure and a citizen, and then officers can ask those questions. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so when you're training officers, you wouldn't say, here's a question not to ask someone. In mere conversation, you would just explain these circumstances and wouldn't.
Absolutely. The questions that are asked are going to be more driven by what that officer is trying to get out of that mere conversation encounter. There are plenty of times when I work in my district, I would just stop somebody and say, hi, I work this district every night, and I work night shift, so I work 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. So if I saw somebody walking down the street, it was more unusual than, you know, a day shift officer. And there were plenty of times I'd just get out and say, I work this district every night, I've never seen you out here before, do you mind talking to me for a couple minutes? Find out where they live, kind of what they do, if they're just out for a walk because they've had a bad day, or, you know, and, you know, is there crime in the area? You know, no suspicious people. You can make those kind of interactions, but then, you know, like recently we've had a lot of gang shootings. So officers in another area of town or on a different kind of mission are going to ask completely different questions. Hey, who do you run with? Who are you hanging out with? I see you've got a blue Kansas City Royals hat on. Are you running with the Crips? And again, those kind of questions could make somebody feel free, not free to leave. So the officers, what we're training them is to start verbalizing. You're free to go. You haven't done anything wrong. But in case you haven't noticed, we've had a lot of shootings lately. You're wearing a Kansas City Royals hat. Can I talk to you about what that means and what you're up to tonight? And it takes away that coercive environment where the courts are going to let us have that conversation with that individual without some authority. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. And what we're training now is to be most effective in doing that is to tie the verbalization of that this person's free to go to counter that coercion when you're asking something that's most likely to make somebody feel like they're not free to go. So what this means is time it with your request to search, your inquiry into contraband or weapons, when asking for identification, or when running a warrant check. So these are the things that the courts have identified that can make somebody feel that way. So instead of doing it right off the bat and then starting into your questioning, hey, how you doing? I'm off school with the Portland Police. You know, what I'd like to do is get your, identifying information so I can see if you've got warrants. I've never met you, I've never seen you in my district before. I just want to know if you're an average Joe citizen or if you're a mass murderer and you've got a warrant, you're running around the district. By the way,
but if you seem where the police officer says you are free to go, I mean, that seems to me to be a very strange thing for someone to say. You're free to go right now, which is sort of like saying, I have no authority over you, and can I search your purse?
And again, it happens.
But it happens.
It happens. And this is what the court says, is if you want to deal on that level, if the person truly feels free to go, you have nothing on them, you have no suspicion of criminal activity. If the person truly feels free to go after you verbalized it, then that's the situation we want, right? If I don't have any lawful authority to ask to get into your bag, then, if I verbalize it, should make a difference, right? And because if verbalizing it makes a difference, then we're really not being honest about whether that person feels free to say no. And this is starting to narrow, and I agree. A lot of people have called this illegal fiction. For years, you didn't have to verbalize. For years, the court necessitated a showing of authority. I had to tell you stop before I got out of mere conversation, and this is definitely narrow.
Is there something about probable cause in here?
In a mere conversation encounter, no. If I'm on duty and in uniform, sir, I can walk up to you and engage you in conversation just like any normal citizen. Until such point, I exercise some authority over you. I tell you you're not free to go. And in probable cause, actually, at that point, then we're talking about, the mental bracelets.
So, I always find this "you're free to go" problematic for me, because you're free to go, and when you say I'm going to head out, then I arrest you. And so there's always that underlying authority that says I'm going to do what I want. And you can either tell me, go ahead, or I'm going to go to the next step and control. Or I can wait here until we get the search warrant or the probable cause or whatever. So it always seems to me it's a fiction, because there's always that underlying, you are in authority, you are in control, I can say whatever I want. I turn around and start to walk off. You say, wait a minute. We're going to pat you down and find out just exactly what you're doing.
See, it's always been this funny, depending on what group you're in. I sit with 10 citizens. Socializing, me and my wife will be with 10 people at a table, and I'll hear that exact same thing. And then I invite over all my friends who are police officers, and they think, God, we can't do anything out there. We have no authority. We can never, it's just, the lawyers and the ACLU, and how do we get anything done? And it's weird because the truth is probably somewhere in between. What I can tell you is, with the huge amount of authority police officers have, we also have a huge amount of responsibility. The first class I teach is an introduction to the justice system for the new officers, and I list all the authority they have to abide by. The United States Constitution, United States federal court case law, federal statutes, Oregon Supreme Court, Oregon Appellate Court, Oregon courts, Oregon statutes, county ordinances, city ordinances, Police Bureau policy, Police Bureau training, Police Bureau culture.